All right, perfect. Looks like we are live. Hello, hello. Great to see everyone. Dan Pierce here with Mentally Fit, and today we are joined by Dr. Ofer Zur, founder of the Zur Institute and of Project Insights, where he's also the director at Project Insights. Dr. Zur is a world-renowned speaker, educator, and trainer, and today he's here to talk to us about how to protect your practice from licensing board complaints and malpractice lawsuits. With that said, Dr. Zur, thank you so much for joining us. Nice to see you.
Definitely nice to see you. Thank you for the intro. So as you can see, we are going to present today how to protect your psychotherapy, counseling, social work, private practice from licensing board complaints and also from malpractice suit. So let's start with the idea of what is a standard of care. And the standard of care is defined as the qualities and conditions which prevail or should prevail in a particular mental health service and a reasonable and prudent practitioner follows. What we understand from this statement is that it's not an ideal standard, and it has to do with the context of where therapy happens. Is it rural America? Is it downtown New York? Is it on a ship in the Navy? So it's a kind of context-based, as I'll emphasize in a minute. What's interesting about the standard of care is that beyond no sex with clients, with current clients, or recently terminated clients, or do not exploit, or do not harm intentionally clients, there is no one textbook or one statement that can capture or define the standard of care. So perhaps kind of undo what a lot of ethics workshop frighten you and kind of into don't and don't and don't and don't, will tell you what the standard of care is not. It's not a standard of perfection. It's not an A- standard. It's actually a C+. It's a minimum standard. It's not free of mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. My children reminds me all the time about the mistakes that I'm making. It's not risk management principles that you get in many of the risk management workshops. Don't touch your clients, don't give them gift, don't leave the office, don't. All these don'ts are not part of the standard of care. It's part of risk management, but not part of the standard of care. It doesn't follow psychoanalytic principles of don't self-disclose and don't create eye contact and etc. Don't touch. So it's not doesn't follow downtown New York psychoanalytic practices. Majority does not determine the standard of care. That means if most therapists are practicing CBT, that does not make CBT the standard of care. It's still allowed to humanistic, to psychoanalytic, to somatic, to whatever 200 types of therapies can coexist. So majority does not rule. What's interesting about the standard of care is that it shifts. Like when EMDR came to the picture about 25 years ago, it was new with very little research, but it was integrated, it was incorporated into the standard of care as a promising new way of dealing with trauma. Of course, now with hundreds, if not thousands of research papers on that, it's definitely within the standard of care. So new innovations are when they have some basic research and some basic articles supporting it, may be incorporated into the standard of care. It definitely does not determine by outcome. Sometimes you can operate within the standard of care and therapy doesn't go right. It still does not put you below the standard of care. It definitely doesn't determine by cost. That means if it's more expensive, it does not put it within the standard of care. So what is the standard of care is based on? Obviously, it's based on federal laws and case law. Case law will be a Tarasoff situation. Federal laws will be HIPAA. State law will be reporting laws and stuff like that. So definitely state, federal, and case law. Then the licensing board regulations, they have kind of whether you can see people, we'll talk about doing custody recommendation or not, or drinking and driving, we'll talk about it. So kind of there's definitely licensing board regulation determine the standard of care within each state. The ethics code, which is actually goes throughout the United States, NASW, APA, CAMF, ACA, and BCC, all of them has a very elaborate ethics code that's updated at least every 7-10 years, and most of you are familiar or have an access to that. It's based also on consensus among professionals. That means if there is a group of people that determine that EMDR is now part of the way to treat trauma, if I use this example again, that's become part of standard of care. Definitely what's in the professional literature, what was acceptable and publishable is become part of the standard of care. And then consensus in the community. So like when I practiced in Berkeley, the standard of care was in somewhat different when I moved to the town of Sonoma or the town of Sebastopol, where people knew me because our kids went to the only one school in Sonoma, or to the Waldorf school in Sebastopol. So it was a different feel for operating within different contexts. Imagine yourself again on an aircraft carrier where you are mixing and matching with your clients all day long and all night long. And then again, it comes to the respect of minorities and new approaches. I give the examples of EMDR. It can be many other examples that sometimes respected minority still have, is included within the standard of care. Then if many social workers are working with a department or agency and they have their own rules and regulations, and this is also part of the standard of care for those who are operating within the standard of care. As I mentioned before, the standard of care is a context-based. So what's applied in prison may not be applied in psychoanalysis. When you do a home visit, it may also feel very different when you work on a military base. When you have a humanistic psychology and you are joining your clients in the grief process into a cemetery, this will be applied and appropriate in certain contexts, especially if you work within the same church or same synagogue or same mosque. So it's context-based. And what's good for a tribe in Alaska, it's different than downtown LA. It's big difference. And we'll allude to that later on more, to the context-based when we talk about ethics and we talk about how to protect yourself. And again, when I moved to Sonoma and my clients were going on a field trip with me, and one day, one of them showed up to the basketball league that I started there, about 39. So here I'm guarding my client, and we both played guards, and we both played pretty hard. And then on Monday morning, he come to my office, and I'm doing psychotherapy. So this is what happened in small town. And there's no kind of other way around. There's only way around now when we have so much of the telemental health, but many people, when things settle down, hopefully some will be at telemental health and some will come back to in person. But the shift to a small town was really educational for me. So when you get to situations that you are not sure or you want to get feedback, it's something that I really encourage, and I do it regularly in my practice. I'll outline for you 5 types of consultation. The first one is a hallway consultation or quick phone consultation with a colleague. So right now, many of you are doing telemental health online. You are not sure whether your client may be suicidal. How do you need to follow up locally? And you call a colleague doesn't need to be a super expert for this level, and you just call somebody that would be available for you to do what we call hallway consultation. And very important that you also record it. You kind of record the consultation. The next one is a kind of what's become rather common this day and age, that people putting, without identifying details, they're posting on listservs or chat rooms or WhatsApp, they put to whether 600 people or 20 people chat rooms that are, people can respond to the vignette that they post online. What's important is that you don't put identifying information. That means if it's a man, you may want to disguise it as a woman. If it's young, you may put old. If it's East Coast, it may be West Coast. So you try to make a conscious effort to disguise the identity of the person, and you don't give. So the idea is that even if the person will read it online, he or she will not recognize themselves because you change enough things about the details. Then many therapists have peer consultation. Sometimes they do it right now on Zoom. And a year plus ago, they used to get together and perhaps every other week to meet. And this is kind of high level of consultation because you present to the group and of colleagues that you have chosen kind of carefully before. So this is kind of a peer group consultation. Then somebody come to the practice and you're not sure whether they are suicidal, you're not sure whether there are other complexities of the case, like custody and other situations like that. And one of the better way to get free risk management expert is to call your insurance company. And they'll be happy to give you free consultation because it can save them time in case you have a board hearing or complaint or you have a malpractice suit. So most of the big insurance companies do have attorneys that are willing to do this kind of consultation. Then the last one, the highest level of consultation, is you talk to an expert. It could be an ethicist. I do that regularly. Every week I get people who sign up and describe to me, whether it's half an hour or an hour, describe a case. I give them feedback. They write it into the note. And this is a huge level of protection. I do sometimes clinical expert consultation if it falls within my area of expertise. And then if it's a legal question, you design the consultation with an attorney so that you have ethics part, clinical expert, and then you have an attorney. So Dan, by the way, if people put questions kind of as I'm speaking, you can interrupt me with some questions. Did I lose Dan?
Okay, great. No, I'm here. Yeah, if anyone has questions, definitely type them in the chat and we can get them answered by Dr. Zur.
Hopefully. So let's kind of talk about the heart of the presentation today. I have 23 ways that you can keep your license. 23 items. It's a long list. The first one is the one that, at least in California and many other states, is a number one way that people are losing their licenses or getting on probation, is drinking and driving. So drunk driving is it's not clear how comes the boards decide that if you drunk drive, you cannot practice, but they made the link and they have the law behind them. And now if you're being caught on a drunk driving, regardless of whether it could be Sunday at 2:00 in the morning, you're not seeing clients at 2:00 in the morning on Sunday. And nevertheless, if you have a drunk driving, you are likely to get either probation the first time, or you may lose your license for a period of a few years. So this is very, very common. The next common reason that people get into trouble with the law, with the licensing board, is you make a custody accommodation without knowing even that you have been set up to do that. Many attorneys that do family law would like to get a therapist recommendation that Mary is a good mom and Johnny doesn't want to go with dad or something. So Mary brings Johnny to the waiting room, and Mary, without asking you anything, you say, ask Johnny, little Johnny, he's 6 years old, would you go with your dad? Would you go with your dad to a visit? And Johnny said, oh, no. So Mary comes to the session, Johnny waiting in the waiting room, and by the instruction of her attorney, she asks you to write a note that you observe, and it's your also professional opinion, that Johnny is reluctant to go with his father for visitation. And you heard it from Johnny. So you make the big mistake of writing a note that you have heard or you observe or you recommend that Johnny will not be with his father unsupervised, something like that. She sometimes, the woman or the man will give you a letter that the attorney already wrote for them. And you make some mistakes and you write this note, and you can lose your license behind this 2 sentences note or even 1 sentence note. The reason for that is that you have not done custody evaluation, which is complex and long and elaborate process. And the custody evaluator that interview mother, interview father, interview Johnny, interviews a teacher, interview Johnny's friends, interview the neighbor. When the custody evaluator did his or her work, they found out that whenever father is ready to go with Johnny, Johnny's supposed to go with father, mom ran to the bathroom, put a knife to her chest, and she said, if you go with dad, I'm going to kill myself. So Johnny said, I'm not going to go with my father. But you wouldn't know that. But the custody evaluator would know that. So I'm trying to to put the fear into you when it comes to custody evaluation. Don't write anything, regardless of how much tantrum the client or the client's attorney ask you to write anything about custody. Don't use the word custody in any letters when you see only the father. And if you see the father and a mother, or even in family therapy, but you're not a custody evaluator, I also advise you, don't do that. Leave it only for the custody evaluators. And that's really one of the better ways to keep your license. And attorneys are smart, and people are highly manipulative, and therapists try to do the right thing and to get into trouble. So I hope I made it clear around custody recommendation. Again, any questions, type it in, and either me or Dan will be able to respond. The third element is something new that we see in the last few years. I have right now 3 cases where a client submitted to the board hundreds of texts between them and their therapist. In Arizona, there was a case of 2,300 texts that were submitted to the board. So you get into a rhythm with a client, and it gets to 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, and you get, how are you? I had a dream, looking forward to see you tomorrow. Can we visit? It's like get into the slippery slope of friendship, and the boards are frowning upon it. It's a kind of not he said, she said. It's a texting, just you have nothing to debate or nothing to defend yourself when you see these hundreds of texts. So even though I've been doing defense for therapists around the country for good 20 plus years, there's nothing for me to defend when this kind of texts are being shown. because it's a boundary crossing that may be boundary violation. It doesn't tie to therapy, and it's inappropriate. The 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock at night, texting. So I want all of you that listening to that, do your own inventory. If you have kind of start slipping into the slippery slope on texting with client during the day, at night, just stop it. And it's okay if you stop it and you cite what I've been saying right now, or you go to the articles that Dan will provide, that I provided to Dan to give it to you, so you can cite it and you can really scale back to just only clinical texts. So just think about all the clients that you exchange email or text in the last few years. It may come to haunt you. So I feel protective of you. And it's getting worse and worse right now as more younger therapists coming into the profession. So obviously, sex with the current clients is below the standard of care, and you're going to lose your license. And if you do it with a recently terminated client, also ACA, it's 5 years, APA, it's 2 years. So be careful. I sometimes get cases where the therapist and the former patient, I'm interviewing one of them, sends the other one to another interview to see whether there's no coercion or really the sexual relationship are appropriate without power differential and stuff like that. So be very careful with the intimate relationship. Absolutely not while you see them in therapy. Again, ACA, it's 5 years, APA, 2 years, NASW, it's 2 years as well. So even after 2 years, you still have the burden of proof that there was no coercion and there's no kind of undue influence. And this is kind of not that easy to prove. Again, if you have any questions, type them in. Breach of confidentiality. And now we're seeing more breach of confidentiality online when people start kind of into Facebook communication, some of them on Instagram, some of them on LinkedIn. So any kind of breach of confidentiality is number 5 in the concern about licensure. Another new development that we see right now, it's one of the more common complaint next to the texting into the night, is the client put a negative review on Yelp and the therapist made the mistake of responding, no, I didn't do that. By that, acknowledging the therapeutic relationship and violating confidentiality laws. So we'll talk a little bit later on about how to do that. But for now, if you have a negative review on any website, just do nothing. Just look for Ofer Zur, OFERZUR. You put it into the internet, you'll find hundreds of articles, and the Zur Institute that I kind of founded many years ago. And now under fantastic new management. But so if you have a Yelp review, you do nothing. Because if you do anything, you're going to be in trouble. I'll talk about it a little bit later. Business dual relationship are tricky, even though I wrote 2 books on dual relationship, published by American Psychological Association and published by Taylor and Francis. So I wrote dozens and dozens of articles on the topic. So business dual relationship, it's what sometimes we call in the field, even Dr. Zur will not approve. Because I know when I move to a small town and play basketball with my clients, etc., I wrote about dual relationship, and they are unavoidable in many settings, in small communities, on military bases, and so. But business dual relationship are very tricky, and almost all the time I recommend when people consult with me not to go in this direction. Now, if you started your relationship a few years after therapy ended, or sometime after therapy, this is kind of perhaps a different question, a different story. But be careful with business dual relationship. That doesn't happen so much anymore. In the past, when therapists turn the debt of clients to collection agency, the next thing, the collection agency acting aggressively with the client, and the client file a complaint. I don't see a lot of it. I just wanted to make sure that you are aware that that's something of a no-no. If somebody owe you a lot of money, take it as a lesson that you should have known not to carry so much debt. Continue with a list of don't once you get the board complaint. First of all, don't ignore the letter. Don't meet with the investigator by yourself. They sometimes may come to the office and say, oh, just give me 5 minutes of your time. It's not a big deal. I just want to ask you a few questions. Don't talk to board investigator by yourself on the phone or in person or on Zoom. Just don't. The same way that you're going to respond to the board investigator with an attorney next to you, you don't write letter back to the board about the accusation, trying to protect yourself. So remember that you don't deal with a board by yourself. You get an expert, ethical expert or standard of care expert like me, and you have an attorney who is experienced with the board, the mental health boards. Next one, definitely once you get the letter from the board, don't contact the client who filed the complaint. It's a big no-no. Be unethical and probably illegal as well. You maybe get panicked and you want to go to the record and try to make sure that you did ask this question, or you want to justify the diagnosis and stuff like that. Don't change the records. There are ways to know when things were entered to the record, time-wise. So just don't do that. So what are the do's that we have around? We talk about the different kind of consultation, and very important that the complex cases, I'll talk about the borderline later on, complex trauma cases, complex family situations, violent clients, suicidal client, for just get an expert in these areas, or even do a hallway consultation and record it, or talk to a group online without identifying the client, but shows in the record that you have done something to attend to the complexity of these cases. And we all have our own triggers, that the clients who pushes our buttons, everybody has it, and we need to know what they are, and to know that you may not be effective when you're being activated or triggered. I personally don't do very well with kind of professional victims, people who don't take responsibility, and I'm not very effective with many victims. And if I end up engage in a victim, and perhaps the victimhood came later on in therapy, I definitely will consult with an expert who can help me get calibrated. So identify to yourself what kind of cases trigger you, what kind of cases kind of activates you. Again, document the consultation, it become part of the record. And check after today, check your board investigation coverage from your insurance. Sometimes it can do only 25,000, and sometimes they can have 50 or 40,000. I can tell you, if you have 40 or 50,000, you can outdo the board who do not, most boards don't have this kind of resources. So if you go from 20 to 40 or to 50, you have so much more leverage with dealing with the board. Get the attorney for you to find an expert like what I do, often with defense of therapists. But if you have $40,000, $50,000 per case to deal with board investigation of you, you are going to have really solid defense. And the board don't have so much resources. So check after today with your insurance company. Something new that we kind of, in the last few years, and of course, since the pandemic started, we have seen much more of that, the cyber liability coverage. So even if you work in an agency or you work in private practice, add to the regular coverage, cyber liability coverage, which will deal with issues of telemental health. So write yourself a term, cyber liability coverage, and see if your professional liability insurance company will provide it to you. If not, you may want to shop around somewhere else. It's not very expensive to get. It's kind of new, and they're testing the water on that. Needless to say, it's you need to keep good enough record, minimally good enough record. So, what you want to assume, it's kind of a hard statement, but I want you to assume that what's not in the record didn't happen. So when the board in licensing review or complaint or in a malpractice suit, you say such and such happened, but there's no reference to that in the record, it can be dismissed, it can be discounted. So if you want something to prove that you indeed did, share, consulted, you want to make sure that it's mentioned in the record. It may not need to be mentioned in super detail in the record, but it needs to be mentioned in the record. And then you can elaborate on that verbally later on if necessary. Continue with things to do. Keep only one set of records. HIPAA allows us to keep two sets of records. The second set of records is a psychotherapy note. It's confusing what's in there, what it's not in there. At the end of the day, the client may have the hand on that, or the attorney for the client. Keep only one set of records. This is my simple straw recommendation. Don't keep a record privately only for you. Just one set of record. Make life simple. Be extra careful when you document boundary crossing. And I'm kind of a big advocate. Some of you know my work about the importance of touch, self-disclosure, gift, bartering, home visits. So whenever you do the boundary crossing, have at least a sentence or two, say what you did and why you did what you did. So I don't say don't do that, but if you regularly hold the client's hand or give a hug at the end of the thing, just mention it in the note. You have extensive self-disclosure, write it in the note. You got a gift from a client, definitely put it in a note. You gave a gift from a client, you mentioned the note. So the home visits and many other boundaries that we'll cover in a little bit. If you get a letter from the board, select an experienced attorney, an experienced expert. In California, we have a few lawyers' offices that are almost exclusively for psychotherapists, social workers, psychologists, counselors, MFTs. But in many states, New York has some expertise, so does Portland and some other states. So what you want to do to try to do the best to find a law firm that are experienced with mental health. There aren't enough cases in many small states. So what you want in this situation for the local attorney to talk to an expert, nationally known expert, humbly I say I'm one of them, that learn what's the in and out of mental health. So best experienced attorney, an experienced expert. Contact your insurance company right away because they are going to pay for your expert and for your attorney. So then we need to do. Now, the last item for the list of how to preserve your license. And that is kind of politically incorrect a little bit, And you are one, this is an article I wrote, you are one borderline away from losing your practice. And I encounter complex and convoluted cases of the borderline like it's from another world. There was one borderline back east, a woman in her 30s, that ended up having sex with two social workers in an eastern state. And these two social workers, women, did not have a lesbian relationship ever in their lives, but she was so powerful and got into such a close connection with them that they end up having sex with her. And I know that I was taken by a borderline in the beginning of my career. And I start kind of, with the advice of the borderline, start going for a walk and perhaps going to the local market. Thank God my supervisor really stopped me right away. And kind of what happened with the borderlines, they're being nice and seductive. And when they hear a no, we get the rage and they sit in the waiting room and sob for hours and we feel pity for them. We can speak for another 5 hours of how to deal with the borderline. Now, it's our responsibility to deal with the borderline. So this is not a blame of the borderline personality disorder patient. This is a huge alarm that when you start crossing small boundaries, I had another case right now in a northeastern state where the borderline start wearing the undies of the woman therapist. I mean, coming to her home. In LA, there was a case that she was end up doing babysitting for the therapist. So it's incredible. And it's not very defensible. I can explain to a judge or a jury the power of the borderline, but at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to set the limit. And so I gave it kind of a slide on its own that to remember that when you have a borderline, you remember this title, the article on the webpage of the Zur Institute on that, and also on my own page, on my own website. We are one borderline away from losing your practice. And just put it into Google and you'll find it. One more kind of interesting thing about our field, that I would say that at least half of the cases that I've encountered in my career, it's a subsequent therapist. The next therapist will say, what, he touched you? Or what, he did a home visit? Or what, he gave you $10? This kind of a judgment without calling the former therapist. So sometimes therapists get in trouble because a colleague, the subsequent therapist who sees the clients next, is the one who put fire underneath the client to file a complaint with the board. It's really a sad statement how we are turning on each other. But one of the better ways to deal with that is really if we get a way to talk to the subsequent therapist when we refer people to other therapists. So I coined the term subsequent therapist syndrome another 10 years ago probably, and it's now kind of being used in the literature. Shifting to any question, Dan, so far? Do we have Dan through?
Yes, we have some questions, but let's wait until the end because I think maybe you'll cover them in the next slide. So let's just save it for the end if that works for you.
Okay. So in general, we as mental health professionals do not have a lot of lawsuits. Juries are not known to feel bad for somebody who got hurt feelings. It's different if somebody lost a foot, if somebody broke their back, et cetera, et cetera. There can be a lot of reason for a malpractice suit, but they are not very sympathetic for hurt feelings. And for example, psychologists are, malpractice insurance is about between $1,100 to $1,300. MFTs around the country paying $200 to $400 a year in insurance. Counselors, similarly, about $300. But my cardiologist, for example, pay between $40,000 to $60,000 a year. So compare the 400 to 40,000, it tells you that cardiologists are being sued and there are settlements that the insurance need to pay. So the insurance charge a anesthesiologist paying thousands of dollars a year. And we are paying between $300 and psychologists $1,200. So it's really, we pay very little, which gives you the sense that there are not too many lawsuits that the insurance company end up paying for our clients. Doesn't mean you don't need to be careful, etc., but it just gives you the sense that the relatively civil lawsuits are rare and complaint to the boards are much more common. And once we talk about civil lawsuits, when a client attempted suicide or committed suicide, sometimes the family will file a lawsuit. This is why it's important to connect with the family in situations like that and to facilitate and share the grief with them. Sex with current or recently terminated clients, when the relationship breaks away, they sometimes file a lawsuit. Again, it doesn't go too far, but it depends. Failed business dual relationship are more common, and it's a little bit hard to justify. I've done a few cases like that and succeeded to show that actually the client was as powerful, as knowledgeable as a therapist in the business relationship. But it can be still very tricky when the dual relationship fail and lawsuits come later. Breach of confidentiality, we see more of it online these days. So whether responding to a Yelp response or communicating with client on Facebook, so you need to be careful. I'm watching our time. Quickly, ethical decision making. This presentation will be available to you, so you'll be able to go back and check it whenever you want. Defines the problem, the question, gather the facts, identifies the relevant code of ethics, laws and regulations which are relevant to the case, identifies several options of action, different courses of action, and what's the likely outcome of different actions. And then implement one of them that you think would be the best or the most appropriate or clinically, ethically, legally most appropriate. And then you assess what you have done. You see the outcome. Did it really serve right? Do you need to change it? Take a new course of action? And then, of course, record, and record. I'll move forward, I'm aware of our time. And we'll leave some time for questions as well. When we talk about ethics in psychotherapy, we really need to talk about boundaries and to get clarity about boundaries. So therapeutic boundaries include gifts from therapist to clients, from client to therapist, touch, so client and therapist touching each other. When we do self-disclosure, either online or in person, all these are boundaries. Dual relationship are boundaries, even concurrent or sequential. When you do out-of-office experience, when you go for a walk and talk with a client or you do a home visit, it's a boundary issue. If you have a home office and the clients come to your home office, right now when you do telemental health, and you'll say you'll have a home office, then all kind of boundaries can see where the therapists live, how they live, who they live with sometimes. Fees and bartering are boundaries, time and length of session, how close do you sit, what clothing you wear, what clothing the client wear. And then we have digital boundaries that we'll talk in a minute. The two types of boundaries, boundary violations and boundary crossings. And I've written tons of that. The Zur Institute have dozens and dozens of articles on that. So does my website. So boundary crossing are appropriate self-disclosure, and this is within the standard of care. Non-sexual, appropriate, comforting touch, a hug, holding a client's arm, hand, whatever it is, a kind of non-sexual, comforting touch is boundary crossing, which is appropriate, and it's not a boundary violation. Appropriate gifts, either way, to therapists or to clients, are appropriate boundary crossing. Fair bartering. Bartering are not against the standard of care. They are not unethical. But fair bartering is part of a sound therapy. Home visit to homebound patient, that means you have a reason to do a home visit. This also boundary crossing. Escorting clients to important medical, so the client is phobic, needle phobic, or hospital phobic, and I've done it a few times. I escorted them to medical appointment. They didn't have anybody else to do it for them, and we talked about it, I documented it, and I did end up doing the medical appointment with them. Googling clients for safety reason is also appropriate boundary crossing. And when you do an adventure therapy and you go backpacking with a client for 2 weeks, you can imagine there is a lot of boundary. You shower with them, you sometimes sleep in the same tent or next door to each other, you eat together, you share a lot. So in adventure therapy is a tons of boundary crossing. Now we are in an era of digital era, and we have digital boundaries. So self-disclosure and transparency, how much of what you reveal online, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. Are clients Googling us? I hope so. They want to find out about us before, during, and sometimes after therapy. Definitely before and during. And we therapists Google our clients, and we need to do it under certain circumstances that I'll cover in a minute. Communication, not only by phone, by Skype and chat and Second Life and LinkedIn, kind of, it's become very, very murky. And kind of, this is digital boundaries. Some of them are appropriate and many of them are not. The digital, what we talked, the texting into the night, this is kind of where my worry about digital communication. Social networking with clients are also very complex, and we see a lot of it. Kind of the older people say it's not ethical. The younger people say what's about it. So kind of we have a generational divide here. I mentioned before, you get a bad digital harassment or bad review on Yelp, don't respond. We'll talk about it in a minute too. And sometimes our clients just, texting during the session on the phone. They don't think twice about it. And it's a boundary issue. Then we have a whole bunch of boundaries that we can't avoid. Like if you live in a rural community or small community, when I say kind of people, I play basketball, I went to the gym, even sometimes in my lecture, I say, is it ethical to be naked with a client? And of course, everybody say, oh no. But when I walked out of the shower in Sonoma, in the only one gym that is there, guess who is there? One of my clients. He walked out of his shower. So sometimes in rural, small communities, you can even end up naked with the client. So it's all in the context. This, of course, extreme example, but it kind of drives home the notion that it's a context. Small community within big cities like LGBTQIA, faith community, AA community, there's a lot of boundary crossing there. Military bases, I cannot tell you the incredible stories that I hear about the mix and match of therapists on military bases and aircraft carrier. And similar in university colleges, you go to the pool and you are in a bikini and your client is in a bikini, et cetera, et cetera. All kind of mix and match in the hall, in the eating area and stuff like that. Home office sometimes create unavoidable boundaries where people can see where you live, how you live. When you do a home visit, sometimes they serve alcohol, that you may not eat what they serve. In adventure therapies that I mentioned before, a lot of boundary crossing. Equine therapy also, the client is on a horse and you are next to them on a horse or on the ground, and a lot of interactions. Training institution, like the Jung Institute or the Psychoanalytic Institute. Sometimes it's mix and match because you are being trained by somebody who supervises you. Another person do therapy with you, Jungian or psychoanalysis, and then there is Christmas party or Hanukkah party. So there's a lot of boundary crossing. Also in police and law enforcement, sometimes the psychologists on the unit treat with the clients, but sometimes they also treat the officers. And that can become complex, but it's part of the complexity. In contrast to boundary crossing, we have boundary violations, and this is when the therapist crosses the line of decency, intentionally, carelessly, or recklessly violate, exploit, or harm the client, or simply operate below the standard of care. So it's a simple definition here. So a quick reminder for you that boundary violation can be initiated by therapist or by client. Sexual touch can be initiated by client. Some clients flash themselves. Some client Google you or Google your family or stalk you. So boundary violation can be initiated by client and executed by client and by therapist, just to remind you. At this day and age, I would like to remind you that online exposure and transparency is common. We had this picture on our refrigerator, so our daughter and our two boys grew up with that. And what it says, consider anything you post online as tattoo on your forehead or your body forever. This is how we raise our kids. So assume that modern, young, or not necessarily only young therapy client are going to Google you. When I put some of my adventures online that I was a paratrooper, I was a lieutenant in the paratrooper, I was a deep sea diver, and I had my bike in the desert, and it's online, and my clients or people who work with me forensically can all see it. I talk about living with the Maasai, top left, climb Kilimanjaro is my older boy. I'm interested in boundaries, so I went to the China Wall and also went to Alaska glaciers. All this, I assume that my clients or the attorneys I work with, whoever it is, can see all these things. I went to the Himalaya on motorcycles. Here is me and my two boys on a motorcycle. The giraffe, when I was in Kenya in my 20s, came and visited us for dinner. And here's my kids and my stepchildren, all five of them. So you need to, regardless of where it is online, I assume that my clients, forensic, clinical, whatever it is, will see all these things. And I strategically make the decision. Do I want to have it there or not? So everything you put online, just assume that your clients will reach. So you clients will Google us before, during, or after. What I want you to do, even right now, I may give you a minute. I want you to go and to set Google Alert for yourself. So you go to google.com/alert and you put different combination of your name. And that means that you do it on, let's say you get notified once a week. At the beginning, everything that you mention on you online, you'll get notification. But then you won't get notification unless there are new ones. So go to www.google.com/alert and put different combination of your name. So for me, I put Dr. Ofer Zur, and then the search for Ofer Zur, and the search for Dr. Zur, or the search for Ofer Zur PhD, or Ozur, or Ozur PhD. So I put all these 6 combinations, so Google will search. At the beginning, you'll get a lot, and within a few weeks, it will dwindle down to perhaps you'll get one time every month or one time every 5 months. So this would be something for you to do so you know what your clients have access to. So if you don't do it right now as we speak, we may not have the time to give it to you right now, but write yourself the www.google.com/alert. I mentioned the Yelp before. When you get bad review on Angie's List or Yelp or any kind of Better Business Bureau, Consumer Affair, remember the first thing that I would like to emphasize for you and for you to remember from this presentation: do not protest, do not post any response to negative evaluation. Then you get my number and you email me and we consult with you, we calm you down, but you haven't done any damage yet. And you can ask favorable recommendation from colleagues, not from client, to put on Yelp. Sometimes Yelp may not post it. And use the opportunity to develop your website presence. Again, you do not call the clients. You do not respond online. And what's interesting to know, if you have 4 positive comments and 1 negative one, it's more trustworthy for consumers than to see 5 positive ones, because you don't believe the 5 positive one. But 1 negative and 4 positive, they do believe. So you may even get a miles out of a negative review on review sites. It's rare that you succeed to resolve it amicably. If somebody complains online on you, don't try. And this is why I put it kind of the cross out. Don't try to get into legal defamation fight. It will drain you, and I doubt you're going to get any money out of it. One of the biggest questions of our time is, do we accept clients as Facebook friends? I'll spend just a few seconds on that, because we could talk about it for a whole hour. The Zur Institute have courses on the topic, so you can check with www.zurinstitute.com and get, you have a few courses that deal with issues of Facebook friends. To summarize, it's like what you see kind of is a problem when we talk to clients as friends is the privacy and confidentiality. This is what we may be violating when we do communicate with them on Facebook. So then you become friends, you become digital social dual relationship, not necessarily unethical per se, but definitely frowned upon by the digital immigrants, but the older guys. It depends on what's on your Facebook profile. Kind of the easier recommendation, create a professional page and separate it from your personal profile, where you control who can see what's in your personal profile. And that's, of course, back to, it depends kind of who is the client. Two young clients and young therapists perhaps will not blink much about the self-disclosure. Some of us older ones kind of are a little bit more cautious. To heads up, the ACA and NASW Code of Ethics specifically forbid or discourage accepting clients as Facebook friends. This is kind of what I said, the digital immigrant kind of writing the codes, kind of the old ones, and we kind of impose it on digital natives. So kind of, but you need to know that the ACA and NASW Code of Ethics are frowning upon these practices. Quickly, as we kind of ready to get to the hour, to Google or not to Google our clients, another very important question. And sometimes we have good reason to do that. In the client is suicidal, issues of safety. Let's say if I have a home office, I want to know, I'm a woman, I'm a single woman living at home, and I want to check this new male, does he have any records of assaulting two women? When I do home visit, I would like to know what neighborhood I need to deal with. So, oops. Okay. we may want to Google our clients when it comes to dangerous clients, litigious client. Is a client delusional? One time I saw a client and he said it was Fortune 500 executive. And I didn't know if it was delusional or who he was. And I watched him kind of going out and figure out that he was a Fortune 500 executive. So I Googled him to find out kind of what was happening. Sometimes forensic population, you want to know really to get real history, a record of criminal record, history, etc. A young therapist kind of call this Googling our clients forgivable sin. I'm not sure how much forgivable it is as long as kind of we old people run the show here quite a bit. So I suggest that you'll be really careful still. What I suggest that you put a sample of consent, informed consent in your when you start practicing as part of the office policies, and it's a time doctor whatever may conduct a web search on his or her clients before the beginning of therapy or during therapy. Doctor such and such will inform you if she conducted such search, and if you have a concern or question regarding the practice, please discuss it with the doctor. So having this kind of quick paragraph in your office policies that all clients kind of read and sign before the first session, that kind of give you the protection too. So quickly kind of about texting, I guess we don't need to kind of go too much with that. Just to remind you what I said before, long trail of texting have become the prominent evidence of substandard care in board complaints and in civil cases. So this is what I would like you to remember. To remember that texting is a slippery slope. And we don't have too much time to go into it, but you could identify in the office policies about texting. And I guess we're going to do next Friday, we're going to do another seminar, and we're going to go to the new world order with pandemic. That kind of, we won't have a chance to do it today as the hour is over. But we have a whole new world, and I'm going to cover it on the 19th as part of the Zur Institute, zurinstitute.com is going to put 2 hours of reflection of the new era. Just to move, do we have any questions?
Awesome, thank you. We do have some questions lined up that have been coming in. And yeah, thanks for the presentation so far. It's been very, very enlightening. So Carla would like to know, can someone successfully sue for being petitioned into a hospital? She's heard that no, they're not able to, but she's also heard that many clinicians are afraid of this situation. Do you have any insights on that?
It really depends. It really depends what the client, why the client was admitted. It's in the documentation and in the consultation. So you have a complex situation where you're thinking about admitting somebody, just call right away your insurance company to risk management. You can contact me and I'll do a quick assessment and consultation with you with that. So it's not a yes and no answer, but the response is consult both ethically and legally and even clinically, but it's legally and ethically on these 2 fronts.
Makes sense. Thank you. John would like to know, what do you think of clients recording a video therapy session?
It's another kind of digital natives, the one who kind of grew up with the technologies. It's a sometimes no-brainer for them. And I think that the digital immigrants, the older ones, have kind of a knee-jerk response to that. And but the young ones do that, and they like to listen to it in the car on the way home or another time, or to share it with somebody. My sense, it's a prerogative of the client unless you have kind of some really good clinical reason. But I think it's a generational divide here that we have.
That makes sense. Another question from John is, how often do family members sue a therapist when their client completes suicide?
I don't know. We don't have the statistics. A lot of it are being settled out of court. I think if you have a suicidal client, what I would like to see to protect you is to have excellent record of dealing with a suicide prevention, and consulting with a psychiatrist, consulting with risk management. And then even if you do all that and the clients may commit suicide still, you'll have all the risk management steps that needed to be done in cases like that. So if you ask the question how often, what the answer is, be super careful with consultation. Again, it's free with the insurance company, and then perhaps clinically it won't be that free. You may be able to do it on your state association. But document and be thorough, and document are part of the record, and the consultation are being documented as well.
Great, thank you. Great answer. Karina would like to know, when you are documenting the consultation, do you recommend making that part of the client's personal medical record or keeping the record separate?
Don't keep two sets of records. If it's not in the record, it didn't happen. So again, it's a good question. I'm happy that it came up. Keep one set of record, and consulting and recording the consultation, whether it's legal, ethical, or clinical, it can be very, very important to show that you operated within the standard of care, even though the clients may end up committing suicide or committing a crime, whatever it is, but it shows that that you didn't leave a stone unturned. But what's not in the record kind of didn't happen. So no two sets of records.
Excellent, thank you. Got a couple more questions here if you've got time.
Yeah.
All right. Tresha would like to know, are there any liability concerns about therapists marketing themselves as coaches?
Excellent question. And the Zur Institute is kind of attending to that right now. I think it's the 18th, they have a program for coaches. Again, check the Zur Institute .com. And I think that we see a lot of therapists who also operating as coaches. What's most important for me, and there's so much more details, but I'll tell you the most important part is that the coaching website or web page doesn't have your license number, and the coaching contract said coaching does not treat mental disorder. And second item, if I spot a mental disorder, I'll refer you to a licensed psychotherapist. I want to hear these two statements without your license mixed up. So create some separation between your psychotherapy under the license website and your coaching, and make sure that these two statements in the coaching are stated clearly at the beginning. Again, check the Zur Institute website for a course on coaching that be a free half an hour on March 18.
Excellent, thank you. We have a member from Canada who's wondering if you know of any sources of training or orientation for new clinicians so they can learn the basic aspects of the legal work on the legal side of things.
It's interesting, it came from Canada, so you need to, legality, kind of the ethics code are kind of similar of the Canadian and the APA and the NASW. I mean, most of the codes are similar in this regard. Legality, it has to become kind of be local. I don't know the scene so kind of to Google an attorney that deal with mental health. Again, you won't find an attorney that does only mental health in Canada probably, because they do a lot of other things. This would be kind of the place to go in the state association as well.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, if you have time, we would love to hear more about Project Insights and how people can get in touch with you about that, and also consultation with you. Tell us all about it.
Okay, so this is kind of my new website, and I do consult a lot of difficult cases, complex cases. I work with attorneys, or work just to get clinical ethical consultation. And this will give you a lot of protection and hopefully better service. So you go to drzur.com. And then kind of once I transfer the leadership of the Zur Institute to Dr. Glenn Marks, and I started Project Insights, and it's www.projectinsights.org. And this kind of like a thoughtful Facebook kind of look in some regard. So I have kind of right now 8 topics. When you can write reflection, you can respond to other people, but it's kind of it's about insight and being thoughtful about different topics. Like, if the corona could speak, what would it say? If you have to burn away something in a fire, what would you feed the fire with? Who are your role models? How do you experience racism in your life, in your culture? What kind of moral junction you stood in your life? And what your relationship to animals, to the furry friends? What gives you hope? And then, what's a new year? What post-pandemic life will be like? And we're going to talk more about post-pandemic on the March 19 with the Zur Institute as well. We're going to have another, the first part will be somewhat similar. The second part will be taking it to the next level.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Zur, thanks again for sharing your time and experience with us. This has been really great, and we'd love to have you back again sometime, and appreciate you coming out today.
Thank you so much. It has been really, I appreciate you setting it up and making it so nice and simple. And people have kind of, this is kind of where you find it. This is how you contact me.
Excellent. Yeah, everyone make sure to check out drzur.com, DRZUR.com, as well as the Zur Institute and Project Insights for more great stuff from Dr. Zur. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Signing out. All right, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Zur.